You'll probably already have the answer to most of these questions before you start the process with the dealer. This calculator is an interactive tool that you can easily change on the fly. But for this presentation, let's start with 100, meaning a dealership that sells approximately 100 new and used vehicles a month. We're also going to assume that every time a customer comes back to their service department for a service to be performed, that it's going to be worth an average of about $38 in upsell revenue per redemption. Step 2 allows a dealership to focus on having a contract issued on every delivered unit he has, new and used. And for this example, we're going to assume that the dealership or the factory gives away a program on 65% of the dealership's deliveries, and his F&I department sells what we're calling a wrap program on 35% of the deliveries. On this first look in step 3, we're going to assume that the dealership is not currently selling anything in his service drive, so we'll start showing that no contracts are being sold in his service drive. And we're going to say that every contract that's issued at the dealership, whether it's dealer, factory, complimentary, or a wrap, that 75% of the contracts that are issued will actually come back to the selling dealer and have those services redeemed at the selling dealership. And finally, in step 4, we're going to assume that every time an F&I manager sells a program, it's going to be worth $275 net income to the selling dealership. We're going to assume that every time the dealership gives a program away, whether it be factory complimentary or dealer complimentary, it's going to cost $50 on that delivery. This first pencil, we're not selling anything in the service drive, so we're not showing any revenue there. And then we're also going to say every time one of these is sold or an upsell takes place, it ought to be worth about 25% profitability to the selling dealership. And that number is a conservative number. Again, we know that profitability in the service drive is going to be 25 to 35% depending on what they're selling. From these simple input items, we can now generate a report and paint a picture of what that dealership's expectations should be like, assuming these parameters are in place for a 3-year period of time. He starts doing business with us today, and 3 years from now, he stops doing business. Under those parameters, what would this look like for this selling dealership? First, we're going to repeat those stated fundamentals right here. These are the assumptions that we plugged in to paint this picture for the dealership. This first graph will paint the revenue stream that that dealership can have on these assumptions, from the wrap contracts that were sold, the upsell revenue off of those wrap contracts, and finally the upsell revenue off of the contracts that were given away. Next, we can track the customer visits that the dealership can expect under these assumptions. And the purple represents the wrap contracts that were sold, and they ramp up for a 36-month period of time. These are visits to his service department. Then, assuming he quits riding with us, the following 36 months is the exact mirror image rundown of the business runoff. Consequently, the green visits indicate the visits to the selling dealership from those complimentary programs that were issued at the time of delivery. And those are historically a shorter period of time. If you quit writing in 3 years, you have a 1 more year runoff period historically on that book of business. This next graph shows the cumulative revenue chart for those contracts that were sold and given away. I don't spend much time on that generally. And finally, this last graph is a pretty powerful graph because it breaks down by item whether the contracts were sold as a wrap contract or whether it's a giveaway contract. This is showing the dealership graphically what he could expect to have in visits to his service department from year 1, 2, 3, and it's the cumulative snapshots of visits to his service department for that runoff period of time. With these quick steps, we can show the dealership what his cost is and what his net revenue stream will look like. In this case, $593,730. We can also calculate his net profit based on the 25% factor we plugged in on our assumptions page. In this case, $177,682.50 of this revenue stream would be pure net profit that goes to the dealership's bottom line as this business runs off. Remember these bottom line numbers, and let's go tweak a few figures and see how that impacts performance. First, in step one, we know that upsell revenue in the service drive, $38 is a very low number. Historically, what we find at dealerships is that they're usually getting 0.7 to 1.1 of their effective customer labor rate as upsell revenue. So assuming this particular dealership had a posted labor rate of $90, his effective labor rate at 0.7 would calculate out to be $63 in upsell revenue. That's a reasonable number that they could shoot for. But in this example, let's go even more conservative than that. Let's say they got less than that. Let's change this number to $55, which again is a very defendable number for a typical dealership. In step two, our dealers that embrace the pack, wrap, and express business model are seeing penetration of wraps in excess of 50%. Let's change this number to reflect that the 50% penetration figure. In step three, we initially showed no contracts being sold there. For every 100 vehicles sold, a dealership typically sees 600 to 750 customer pay ROs. What happens if we put a program in place that allows you to sell something to those service drive prospects? Let's say you sell 20 contracts to those 600 plus prospects. Now, step four remains the same with the exception of on those 20 contracts we sell in the service drive, assume we make, let's use a conservative number. Let's say we can sell it and make another $65 in net revenue for the dealership. All other assumptions remain the same. With those few tweaks, now let's generate a report and see what that looks like for the selling dealership. The first graph I wanted you to look at is again the monthly revenue graph, and we've added that layer of contract sales in the service drive here and the upsell revenue from those contracts sold here. We've also added one more level of visits to the service department based on those contracts that were sold in the service drive. Again, the annual customer visits is calculated on this graph, and you can see the other 270 visits that happen on the first year just from contracts, the 20 contracts that were sold in the service drive. And the most powerful piece of all is the results page. We've reduced the cost of the program because we tweaked our penetration. We've increased the bottom line revenue to $1,038,000. We've increased the bottom line net profit to $272,000 based on the same set of scenarios, the same sales. We just tweaked penetration levels and upsell revenue. At the conclusion of what I just did as a second pencil, assume the dealership doesn't want to be involved with a complementary program at all. He just wants to see what his numbers would look like if he were selling the program in the F&I department. At that point, I could click the holding number here to calculate the opportunity bleed, and then I could go back and show him exactly what his request would look like. So let's assume this same dealer that's selling 100 vehicles a month doesn't want anything to do with any kind of dealer and or factory complementary program, but he's a fully committed dealer and he thinks his F&I guys will do a good job and they'll sell 35% penetration like our original book of business reflected. So let's just show him what it looks like if he sells 35 contracts a month. All the other variables remain the same, except he's not giving anything away. And I've gone back to the $38 in upsell revenue, but it doesn't matter if we keep that at 55 or 38. For these purposes, it'll be pretty dramatic anyway. I want you to see what dramatically happens to the dealership's revenue. He's still going to have revenue from contract sales, these 35 contracts he's selling. He's still got revenue from the 20 express contracts that we plugged in on the second pencil. He's got upsell revenue on those wrap contracts that were sold, and he's got upsell revenue on the express contracts that were sold. His customer visits with this recalculation have reduced dramatically during this same snapshot of opportunity. His annual customer visits have dropped off exponentially during this snapshot of visits. So what's the bottom line results for this dealer who doesn't want to offer the complimentary programs? He doesn't have any cost in it now. We're selling 35 contracts a month, so his net profitability, or the net revenue for this 3-year snapshot, is now $559,000, and his net profitability is now $136,000. What happened to the rest of the money? Well, I think that now we can honestly show what happens to that dealership is the bleed that he establishes when he doesn't penetrate those other customers. In this case, it's safe to assume that the majority of the 65% of those customers that didn't have a plan issued to them at the time of delivery, some of them are going to come back to the selling dealership, but the vast majority are going to go elsewhere. It hasn't been something that resonates with dealerships in the past because that doesn't show up on their profit and loss statement. It's showing up on the Jiffy Lube's profit and loss statement, Tire Kingdoms, Walmart, all the competitive entities that are sucking your business away from you by not having a retention tool in place. This is the bleed that shows up on somebody else's profit and loss statement.